Welcome to I Could Talk to You All Day. I'm Lauren Lefkowitz, recovering workaholic, perfectionist, and people pleaser.
And I'm John Spears, emerging from playing small, getting caught up in the inertia of life, and always being on.
I Could Talk to You All Day is a show for executives and emerging leaders. This is not just another leadership podcast. We're here to talk about what it means to be a leader while also being human.
So join us for raw, vulnerable, and probably pretty funny conversations about shifting from surviving at work and home to thriving in the life you've always wanted. Let's get the conversation started. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, John.
So we've been having this conversation about executive presence and what it means and doesn't mean, and the impact on thinking about executive presence and the external manifestation of executive presence being the only kind of form of what it means to be a good leader. And we've had some pretty good discussions about that over the past 3 episodes.
We are dismantling this belief that executive presence only has to do with you acting a certain way, talking a certain way, presenting yourself the way you look in a certain way. And we both really firmly believe that there's more to it, and that we don't have to fit everybody into this mold of the middle-aged white guy from the 50s who came home to his, wife and 2.5 kids. So we've talked so far about executive presence overall, and then vulnerability.
Yeah, I love that we've talked about sort of the implications of trying to fit into a certain mold of how we look, how we speak, how we are, how we dress, and offering a different way. And the first in our series was vulnerability, which I thought we had a really wonderful conversation about what it means to be vulnerable and the impact vulnerability can have on our leadership.
Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Lauren, I am so excited about this topic. And today's topic is courage. It's something that I want to have as a leader. I think I have it actually, but it's something that I am just so enamored by, this idea of courage. And when I talk about courage, I'm really talking about not the absence of fear. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when we're talking about courage, I'm talking about the ability to do something in the face of fear, or doing something that frightens you. And I think that is such a powerful thing to be able to do as a leader, but also as a human.
Yeah, I always think of courage as like this one little step, right? It's like you're behind a line or behind one step, and you can see what might be over the edge for you. And it's that one step that takes all of your will and power to get over the edge and on the other side of what happens when you're courageous.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I know when I do things in like the physical world, like when I jump off a cliff or when I'm about to go on a roller coaster, that might be a little on the other side of my comfort zone. Like actually taking that step is really hard to do. Like actually physically moving one foot in front of the other can be a really challenging thing. And I think the same is true when we're talking about doing that kind of emotionally or conceptually, in terms of how we be brave and courageous as leaders by making decisions that are outside of our comfort zone. And so I'm really looking forward to diving into this topic with you today and talking about what it means to be courageous and have courage, what some of the implications are and consequences, both positive and negative, around us either being courageous or not being courageous. And so how about we just dive into that?
Let's do it.
When I think about courage, I oftentimes think about my relationship with fear. And I never wanted to be someone that was courageous because I always felt uncomfortable with having fear. I felt like having fear made me weak. It made me feel insignificant. It made me feel not good enough, until I started really shifting my relationship with fear and started until I really started thinking about what it means to have fear and the fact that there's all of this language around courage and the fact that like everyone experiences fear. And the reason we have courage is because fear exists in the first place.
Fear is there for a reason, right? Like back in cave person times, you had to have fear. It was a survival mechanism. And in the world that we're in now, in the lives that we lead now, the same feelings of fear exist, but they are for less safety related things, like
Right.
not being eaten by a lion. And for the more evolved and elevated things, like going after a promotion, speaking up to your manager, changing careers, doing what you want. And fear now for me feels like an opportunity instead of a stopping point. And for a long time, it didn't. For a long time, when I identified fear, it was a stopping point for me.
Mhm.
It was a stay here. This is comfortable. For me, for a long time, courage didn't really come unless it was forced upon me. And that was really probably more resilience than courage. And now that I've learned more about myself and what I want, fear actually feels like a question to me,
Mm.
right? Like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I pulling myself away from this? Why am I procrastinating on something? Why is this person standing across from me terrifying to me when they're just another human being in my work world? And it's really been something to explore for me.
So Lauren, you brought up this really great point of really being curious about how you feel when you experience fear. And I think we can do that in any emotion or experience that we're having. But I would love to hear your journey from going from a place of allowing fear to being a stop sign for you to it now being a place of like curiosity and exploration.
I think the path to me owning my own business and leaving the work world that I knew was a bunch of those tiny steps into courage.
Mhm.
And when I first decided I was going to start my own business, the idea was that it would be a side gig. It would be in addition to the 80 plus hours a week I was already working, that maybe in 5 years, which would kind of always be 5 years from now in my mind, I would leave my corporate life. And at the same time, I was coaching other people who wanted things, new jobs, new careers, courage to speak up to their bosses. And I was telling them they could have whatever they wanted. And I was helping them jump over those lines from fear to courage to a result. And I didn't believe that it was for me. So I didn't have the courage to really even dream of what my business could look like.
Mhm.
And then I did. I talked to people, I got help, I listened, I got really curious about what my life could look like if it wasn't an 80-hour-a-week corporate job where I was always people pleasing and always solving problems that weren't really mine to solve. And until I was allowing myself to step over that step into courage to even think about it, I simply imagined that my life would be working 80 hours a week at whatever next corporate job I got until like whatever the end of work was, whenever I retired. I just assumed I had chosen this path. This was what I could do. I could help other people choose new paths. But for me, it was about staying in the lines.
Lauren, I think one of the points you just mentioned really speaks to the importance of us having courage. And that's really to break the cycle and pattern that keeps us small. That when we have courage, we are able to explore possibility, to explore the life we've always wanted, and really break from those old habits that don't serve us anymore.
Yeah. And it was like 126 steps of courage.
Yeah.
To get to where I am now, which is a year out of my corporate life, a year into a full-time business that's thriving, that I'm growing, that I really believe in. But I didn't go from one day I was working all of these hours and the next day I was like, cool, I'm going to cut down my hours and start my business and it's going to be amazing. There are little points of courage all along the way. There was one big point where I had to make the big decision that I was going to do this, right? That was the giant step. That was the jump off the cliff. And once I made that, then I got scared again because that's like a really terrifying decision to make. And what I learned was it was really one step at a time. I needed help. I needed to ask for help. I needed to be willing to receive help. I needed to change a lot of the things I was doing and the way I was doing them. But with the support I got and with the help that I got and the encouragement and belief in myself, I was able to keep taking those steps. And I'm still taking those steps. I'm still building really scary things. And I'm also really excited about them. But I'm building this muscle, I think, that I didn't know needed to be built. I'd love to know what your relationship with courage is.
I think my relationship with courage has changed over the last few years. Again, I think, as I mentioned before, I didn't like to have courage because I had this very adversarial relationship and this resistance towards fear. And I think once I accepted the fact that fear is a natural part of life and that I am no longer going to allow fear to be the stop sign for me, my relationship with courage changed dramatically. I think the real power in our lives isn't the absence of fear, but the presence of courage that spurs us to action, to constantly be moving forward, to taking, as you said, the next small step. Once I started to shift my relationship in that direction, I think I really wanted to own courage. I want to be courageous. I want to be someone who is constantly taking that step outside of my comfort zone. Because for me, everything I want in life is on the other side of fear. Meaningful, deep relationships, walking into my fullness of my power and the fullest expression of who I am. That's scary. When I say that, there's part of me that still cringes a little bit because being exposed and putting myself out there as a fully expressed person, there's fear of rejection. There's fear of maybe it's not going to land. Maybe I'm not going to be effective in my line of work or in creating a coaching practice. But when I do it, when I take those steps, it's almost like the universe totally has my back and sort of paves the way. The more courageous I am, I think the more fulfilled I am in my life.
The way your face lights up when you talk about your willingness to become courageous, and I know you can't see this as you're listening, but there's a real shift in you.
Yeah.
That is so powerful when you talk about becoming who you are, being willing to be who you are out loud. Ask for what you need, go after what you want, build the life and relationships that you want to build. It's so powerful. So what was a big step for you in becoming courageous and becoming this full expression of yourself?
Lauren, that's a great question. I think there are probably lots of little steps that I've taken, but obviously for me, the biggest, most courageous step I've taken was probably coming out and owning who I was and telling the people in my life about that. There was lots of fear in that experience. For folks that don't know my story, I came out when I was 33. I was married to a woman, a phenomenal, amazing, incredible woman. I had 2 kids at that time. I had recently moved to a new city, gotten a new job. And so there was a lot of fear around that. When I finally was able to come to this realization that I was gay and then accept it, to be able to say that to someone I care about and love deeply was really hard for me because I didn't know what the other side looked like. I didn't know what would happen if I was courageous, if I was authentic and vulnerable, all the things we're kind of talking about in the series. But it took a step of courage to be able to do that, to take that first step, admitting it to myself, then admitting it to my then wife, family, friends, colleagues. There was that big step that you talk about, and then lots of little steps. And I find that the more I exercise courage, as you also said, as it being a muscle, the more I exercise courage, the easier it is for me to be able to move from, oh, this is scary, to, okay, this is what I'm going to do about it. And these are the steps I'm going to take to go towards my dream life or the goal that I have.
Beautiful. I've been super courageous my whole life. It's not true. I've been very scared my whole life. I've been super courageous recently.
I love that. And what was that shift for you?
The shift for me was the reward of deciding I wanted to have a fun life and really embracing that I could. I just didn't think it was meant for me. You know, I said it when I was talking about shifting from my corporate life. And before I did that, coaching people to follow their dreams, like I was living vicariously through what I knew other people could do, and realizing that it didn't just exist for other people at first was really scary and came into my head as adding more things to my plate because I wasn't a quitter. And really being able to take a deep look at my life and at what I actually enjoy, which I'm still discovering, because when you've been working all those hours for all those years, stepping out of that and having all this free time is actually more fear, right? Like, what do I even like to do? So there's now this discovery process that's really fun in figuring out what I enjoy. And there's this new set of steps towards courage in trying things that I never would have tried before. And I don't even know what all of those things are yet. I know that they are not jumping off cliffs. That's going to not be for me.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. But I'm in a place where, like I said at the beginning of our conversation, when fear comes up, I'm curious about why. Am I afraid of it because I really legitimately think it's something that I can't do or is not for me? Or am I afraid because it seems so good and I'm not ready for something so good? So the courage piece for me is the being willing to try and investigate and test it out and ask other people what they think, right? There's vulnerability then tied in with the courage of, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? Worrying, are people going to think I'm silly or weak or whatever for not already knowing how to do things? And so courage is showing up in my life in all new ways.
So there are probably lots of people who are listening right now who are full of fear, probably paralyzed by fear. They don't think they have what it takes to overcome that fear and to take that first step and actually do the thing that they want to do that's going to leave them more fulfilled, more vibrant, more alive. What would you offer them? What advice would you offer? What perspective would you offer our listeners who are really struggling with being courageous?
This might be an unpopular answer, but you can stay where you are. You can stay where you are and have a perfectly fine life. If I had stayed where I was and finished my career in HR and finished as a busy workaholic, nobody would have turned around to me and said, you wasted your life. But my life now is so much cooler and so much more fun and so much fuller because I decided I didn't want to stay there. And that's what I think courage can do for you. And that's also what I think the distinction is between like courage and resilience. Resilience is like overcoming the things you have to. You don't really have a choice. You've got to step up and do the thing. Courage, I think, is choosing what you want and choosing how you want things to be. So if somebody is just thinking about the thing they want, a side hustle, a new career, a family, a romantic relationship, a dog, it really could be anything that you have this little inkling in your head that it would be really cool to do that thing, to be courageous, to speak up, and you're afraid. I think it's ask yourself some questions. Why am I afraid? Why does this scare me? What are some of the stories that I'm making up about what the negative consequences could be? What are the possibilities? if I actually do achieve this thing, if I go after this thing, if I find the courage to go over that step, and who are my people? And I think that last one is so important because we all have people. And if you don't have people who are supportive of you growing and changing, there are other people you can find. I keep finding new people I like, and that's like really fun. But we're not meant to do everything on our own. And I feel like we say this in every episode. I think it's the thing that a lot of leaders feel like they have to do on their own, right? Like you get to a certain level of leadership and now you're on your own. Good luck. Go figure things out. We never run out of people who can support us. You don't have to do it alone to be courageous. You just have to figure out how you're going to do it. What do you think? Where should people start?
Well, look, I love what you just laid out. There's choice. You have a choice. Do you want to stay where you are in fear or make that choice to take that step outside of fear into possibility? I also love the second thing you said around curiosity, exploring the consequences and the possibilities, and connecting with people, your tribe, community to help you get through it. I think the last thing I would add is do it scared. Fear doesn't just disappear because you have courage. Courage exists in the space of fear. And so doing something scared, even when fear is present, I think is a really powerful step and action to going in the direction of the life you want to live.
Yeah, that's so powerful. For a lot of people I meet and a lot of people I work with who tell me they could never do what I've done. And I'm sure you hear this too, as you reach personal milestones, you become more authentic as you go along, you grow and change and shift, and people see that. There's like almost this imaginary wall that like you can have that and I can have that, but they can't. And I think if you're willing to see what's possible, you can have it. You can have just about anything you want. I say just about everything because like if you haven't already been going to astronaut school all these years, they're probably not going to send you up in a spaceship. So like very minor limitations.
That's a good qualifier. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree with you. You know, I think in all of the conversations we're having around powerful leadership and executive presence, this statement I think that I'm going to make applies to all of them, but it really applies to this one is as a leader, we're modeling behavior. And so being courageous doesn't just impact our lives and give us access to the things we want, but it also shows that other people can have that as well. And so when we are courageous as leaders, when we're vulnerable as leaders, as we'll talk about in the future, when we set boundaries and when we're authentic, that's obviously incredibly impactful for us, but it also just sort of has this secondary impact in showing others that it's also available to them.
It's not only impactful and inspiring for other people, it is for you. And then when you do something that's courageous and you shift your life even a little bit, and you're showing other people that you care about yourself, that you're willing to put yourself first in any area of your life, it shows other people that it can be done and you don't lose your relationships, you don't lose who you are, you don't lose respect. You may lose a few friends along the way. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the consequences of courage. I've lost a couple of people along the way, and it's been for the greater good. And some of those people I've lost, I've really mourned, but they weren't serving me and I wasn't serving them. And in learning to boundary set, which, as you said, we'll talk about boundaries in another conversation, and in having the courage to say, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing it. This is what works for me. Sometimes you are making a sacrifice. You're doing it for you. And when you start believing in yourself more, loving yourself more, and having the courage to find more for you, you end up serving the people around you. So while you have the consequence of maybe losing some people who aren't so great for you, maybe leaving a job that really didn't serve you, didn't pay you enough, didn't respect your experience, your level, your expertise, you're going after what you actually want. So I just walked us through sort of a negative consequence that leads to positive consequences, but there are a ton of positive consequences of being courageous. What do you think some of those are, John?
So I have three off the top of my head. One is when you're courageous, there is more alignment in your life around who you are and around what you want. I know for me, when I've in the past been a big people pleaser and been someone who was afraid to really truly be myself or to say what I actually wanted and needed, I might have had a lot of people around me. I might have had a lot of superficial relationships, but those relationships and those experiences weren't aligned with who I was and what I actually wanted. And so, like you, when I started being courageous and living more authentically, I found that some of those relationships fell away. And like you, though it was sad, it actually gave me more peace and happiness in my life because I had more alignment around my values and who I was. So I think that's the first positive consequence. Second, I find that as I'm continuing to grow and being courageous, that I actually trust myself more, that there's more trust in myself and in making the choices that are going to serve me. I'm no longer abandoning myself to please other people or to live for other people. I'm actually doing the things that are going to serve me and support the direction that I want to go in. The third positive consequence that I would say is that there's action. Being courageous isn't a stagnant thing. It's not standing still. It's actually taking steps to move in a certain direction. And so I find that I'm actually living the life I want. I'm getting the things that I want. I mean, I never thought that, and we were talking about this before we started recording, that like there are so many amazing things that are happening in my life, and they're happening and I'm experiencing them in ways that I never would have thought or imagined. And as we've been a part of this journey together, we've had numerous conversations where they've been scary. I've been scared. I've like called you crying and really struggling with making the right kind of move. And when I take bold action to get the things that I want, I'm getting closer to living that life, to having those things that I thought were so far out of reach for me. And so I would say that those are the three positive consequences around courage.
John, I loved what you said about trust, because when I started working on courage, I didn't trust myself. So the courage was trusting the thing I was trying, right? It was really external. And as those things started working, then I started trusting that I could make some good decisions, be more courageous sort of from my heart and not just from my head and tactical planning. So I think that particular point really hit home for me, that now I'm making decisions where I trust myself, but it's still scary because it's a new business venture, or it's a new friendship, or it's a new activity that I'm trying. And I'm more scared of the thing than I am of my ability to do it.
Right. Well, Lauren, I could talk to you all day about this.
I could talk to you all day, John.
And thank you so much for being a part of this conversation with me and Lauren. We love talking to each other about these topics, and we love that you're joining us and you're part of it. Thank you so much for the feedback that you're sending our way, and for liking and for sharing and for commenting on our podcasts, both on social and other forums. Continue to listen to this series on leadership. Our next conversation is going to be about kindness and compassion, and we can't wait to have this conversation with you then. We're so glad you joined us today. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at I Could Talk to You All Day, and tell your friends and colleagues about us.